Welcome to the Impact Room, brought to you by Douglas Jackson, who help you hire more impactful, diverse leaders who stay for longer and are more successful. The Impact Room is a business, CX and leadership podcast where exceptional, diverse and impactful leadership and wisdom is shared. We dive deep into pressing topics that impact your customer-led business, featuring interviews with CEOs, COOs, Chief Customer, Chief People Officers, directors, influential leaders and subject matter experts who share their lived experiences, top tips, thoughts, advice and industry trends to help elevate existing and future talent. So let's dive into our next episode, and please don't forget to like, subscribe or share if you enjoy this content. Thank you. Great. I'm Michelle Ansell, Managing Partner at Douglas Jackson, and today I am delighted to be joined by John Sills, someone who until a few months ago, and despite many years in the same industry, I hadn't had the pleasure to meet. We spent an interesting few hours together, didn't we, John? And so I was really keen to host you on the Impact Room. John is a Managing Partner at the Foundation, a customer-led growth consultancy who help their clients explore new perspectives and to reconnect with what customers really value, creating impact and commercial success. John's also the author of Human Experience, a board advisor, the trustee of Young Enterprise, and spent many years with global brand HSBC, improving their perception, innovation, and knowledge. John, welcome.
Well, thank you very much. Yeah, it makes me sound like I've been doing this for quite a long time now, which is quite scary, but probably quite true given my grey hair, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, same here. I got my Cruella thing going on. So, John, let's start with the Human Experience then. Why that title, and what can you tell us as to why that's so important?
Yeah, I think it's funny actually. The title ended up being something that was coming from my editor. So I think what really came around from it was sorry, Michelle, did you hear that phone going in the background?
No worries.
Let me just start again and we can just go into now. Yeah, so I think the book came around actually from quite a few years of writing. So I've been writing for about kind of 10 years, different blogs and articles. And it started to kind of dawn on me that like the thing that kind of tied them all together was around like a lack of humanity. So, right. I've been writing all these different things around customer experience and about how, we'd ended up really becoming quite functional in our relationship. We'd had all this amazing new technology that had come about in the world over the last 20 years, but somehow it felt like customers were less satisfied and had poorer relationships than they'd ever had before, really. And so then we ended up kind of getting to a point of thinking about what really is it that's missing, and it is this kind of human element. And it was one of those moments of being in a shower and just it kind of popping into your head and thinking, yeah, that's it. It's about kind of lack of humanity. So I thought, well, that's quite interesting. Maybe I'll go and write a book about that. I'd actually wanted just to call the book Human, but the editor said actually maybe that's slightly too grand and too vague, and I might need to give people a little bit more about what it is. So that's how we ended up with kind of the Human Experience when I wrote it maybe three years ago now, trying to kind of pull together this battle between the functional experience that companies are trying to improve and trying to perfect, but not losing the humanity that's really at the heart of most great experiences at the same time.
It's interesting, isn't it? And we always, in my world, we always talk about the human element. And I think it's like the wood for the trees. I think it's such an important, almost it's critical. You can't, it's so critical, isn't it? Yet we seem to forget about it. Why do you think that is in your experience?
I think there's two big reasons. I mean, the first is that organizations believe that they're going to save a lot of money. So by, using a lot more digital, services, and they do, and they do that, but it's kind of seen as this big, exciting kind of holy grail. So they kind of run into that quite quickly, but they don't necessarily consider what they lose as part of that. So Rory Sutherland, who's he's now famous on TikTok, but, vice chairman at Ogilvy, he talks about the doorman fallacy and about like the doorman at the hotel who used to open the door. You think, well, they can easily be replaced by a rotating door or an automatic door. But the value of the doorman isn't necessarily the opening the door. It's the signalling of the type of place you're going into. It's security, that there's someone there. It's someone who's able to flag down the taxi for you, someone that's able to help you with your bag. So there's all these other intangible benefits that get missed outside just the functional thing. So I think part of it's that. But the bigger thing, Michelle, is just a reflection of how leaders and organizations work and see the world. We all see the world from the inside out. We're all closer to our own business, our own colleagues, our own regulators and competitors than we really are to our customers. And so when you're seeing things through that lens, it makes sense. It's like no one gets fired for hiring IBM. Like, it makes sense to do millions of pound worth of NPS surveys. It makes sense to do things that are going to save money to try and create a more functional experience. But they lose sight of what really matters to their customers and what really matters to them emotionally. And all of a sudden, they then end up accidentally kind of commoditizing themselves by bringing them down to the same level as all of their competitors and losing anything that might have been different. So there's a few things at play, but this kind of inside out view of the world that organizations and leaders naturally and almost psychologically have is what really gets in the way, because they don't realize what they're doing rather than knowing what they're doing and doing it anyway.
It's so interesting, isn't it? And as we advance, certainly, I dread to use the word AI and how that's going. But I mean, the fact is that everybody is going to be the same and have the same capability and functionality if they embrace the technology, because it can just duplicate what you've done in an instant, can't it? So the human element again, that is the differentiator, isn't it, in terms of your employees and your customers and how you feel and all of those elements, would you say?
Yeah, well, I think it is. I mean, I think there's a broader point there about organizations needing to be meaningfully distinct. Like they need to take the time to work out how they really want to be distinct from the competitors and the alternatives. And that comes from understanding what matters to your customers. It comes from knowing what your strengths are, how you want to be different. It comes from looking at the future and seeing where you want to play. What a lot of organizations do, particularly when it comes to customer experience, they end up just subscribing to a generic framework. There'll be a big consultancy that will say, well, these are the 6 things that really matter in customer experience. And they'll just go, yeah, okay, well, let's just do that. And they tend to be quite generic things like easy, simple, straightforward, none of which are wrong, but also obviously the opposite of those doesn't make sense. Like, you'd never want to be not easy. You'd never want to be complicated. So there's a real job, I think, for organizations to do that they tend to shy away from, which is really doing that strategic work of deciding where are we going to be distinct in our experience. And as part of that, you have to accept that 90% of your experience will probably be the same as everybody else's. And in some places, it might be worse. You just need to have 2 or 3 bits that you're going to really excel at and really make you distinct. Now, if you do that, you can start to play around, whether it's kind of digital or human, to work out where your experience is. Because again, when I talk about the human experience, I'm talking about humanity in the experience. You can have a very human online service, for example. So if you look at Who Gives a Crap, who are the subscription toilet roll company, there's no people involved at all, but they're just so human in the way they talk, in the way they write, in the way that they're working, in the way their online ordering system for their subscriptions is just so straightforward and simple. They've clearly thought about how people and how humans are going to really respond and react in that moment. So you need to have that clarity about where you're going to be distinct, and then you need to apply that across every part of your journey, whether it involves a person or not. But being really human and being an organization that people feel they can easily understand and work with, that's what for a lot of organizations will now keep them distinct from others who are just going full into AI and reducing themselves down to a commodity.
It's interesting, isn't it? And that brand, it's funny because I saw them at the weekend, because I think they've gone into dog poo bags now, as well as some other compostable plastic bin liners as well. I saw them with the jelly dropping it into the bags over the weekend. But yeah, good. Okay. So, I mean, you've worked in the industry for a good few years. You've been in senior positions, helping, as we said, some global leading organizations with their innovation and perception. I mean, they're not typical job titles for sure. I mean, I've done this job a long time. I don't think I've ever really gone for a perception and innovation role or had a brief to do that. Do you think should more organizations be thinking about their perception? And I'm not saying they're not innovative, but the innovations that they're doing. And if so, how do you start to identify and understand those future trends?
Yeah, I think they should. So that was the last role I did at HSBC was, as you say, head of customer innovation and perception. And we quite deliberately, it was a new role that we created, and we quite deliberately put perception in there. Because ultimately, your customer experience is the customer's perception of the interactions they have with you. And it's a subtle but a really significant point, because lots of organizations, particularly now, have started to become quite defensive and have started to say, well, this is the experience customers are having. But it's not. The experience customers having is how they perceive that. So you might think you've written a really wonderful letter that's easy to understand, or a great email that they can read. But if they find it difficult, then that's the inconvenient truth, that they find it quite difficult. So I think, organizations, when you're looking at that kind of perception, again, going back to the point about NPS, they tend to rely on a lot of this kind of survey and feedback data coming into the organization to tell them what their customers think. And they spend millions and millions of pounds on it, and it gives leaders a sense of kind of comfort that they're close to what matters to customers. But in truth, they're only really close to customers' opinions of their business. And that's a very subtle but significant difference, again, because all of those surveys are inside out. What do you think about us? What do you think about our service? What do you think about our product? Would you recommend this? And that's very different from really understanding someone's life and what matters in their life and what matters in their day to day, and then how you can be most useful to them. Because that's where all great innovation has come from. It's come from understanding people's lives, spotting a gap, spotting something they need help with, and working out how to be useful. Great innovation has never come from a "would you recommend this" survey. It just doesn't work like that. And so, organizations and leaders need to understand that shift, that what they have coming in at the moment is useful in some regards, but not to really help them innovate. And so then, to your point, if you can get out there and really immerse in people's lives and understand what really matters to them in their lives, that gives you the opportunity to understand their perception on the world, to understand how they're perceiving things that are happening. That includes your competitors and you and your alternatives, but it also just includes their view of what's going on. You can then overlay onto that, okay, where's the world going in the future? Because again, customers can't tell you that. They can't tell you what you should invent in 5 years' time. They can tell you what's true now, and you can observe what's true now. You then need to bring into that, where do we think the world's going in the future? Otherwise, you end up being I think it's Gaston Berger that said, the purpose of looking to the future is to disturb the present. If you don't understand it and you don't disturb it, you're probably going to be its victim rather than shaping it. And all organizations then have that choice. Do you want to lead and do you want to shape that future world? Or do you just want to wait and see what happens and be a Kodak or a Woolworths or a Blockbuster, and many other famous examples of organizations that have just waited and then found out they're not relevant anymore. So that need to regularly go out, understand what matters to your customers, and then combine that with a view of where you think the world is going. That's what creates the possibility of innovation, the environment for innovation, even if it doesn't give you the actual ideas in and of itself.
It's interesting, the points that you make. And when I think about surveys, and you'll probably have more insight than I do on this, but when we're surveyed all the time, aren't we? And I never fill them in unless I am really excellently delighted, that above and beyond, and then I'll bother, or I'm really cross and angry, and then I'll bother. So I mean, if that, I would expect, if I do that, there's going to be a whole host of other people do that. So that does remove, the average, the everybody else that's probably, as you say, feeling all these things or wants all these things, and their needs aren't necessarily being spoken to. So, I mean, why don't we survey people more about what do you want from us as a brand, or how do you sort of see us as a brand? Why don't we do that rather than, will you recommend me to a friend and will you score me on 1 to 10?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think there's two elements to that. So part of the reason that we don't do that, or part of the reason people do the recommended one, is because it's shown to be about future sales. If you're asking people about would you recommend, it's about are we going to get future sales? And again, it's like the IBM thing. It's a proven methodology. Everyone does it. So no one that works in Insight is going to get fired for suggesting you should do an NPS survey, because that's just what everyone does. So it just makes sense. And even, that sounds like I'm being harsh. I'm not. Even if someone in the Insight team says, well, if we do this survey, we get 1 million data points a year, that'll help us understand our customers. Like that kind of makes sense. It kind of makes sense. But it's only when you look into it, you realize that it doesn't really do that. But on the second point about why don't we ask people about kind of the other surveys, but we shouldn't really do any future surveys at all. Actually, I think we do enough surveys. I think part of the problem is we're over reliant on surveys, and what they replace is us actually going out and speaking to people and seeing people in their real life, because people can't tell you the truth. I mean, I went to I did some work once with a company called Samworth Brothers, who are a big food manufacturer, and we were doing a project on the future of ready meals, like the future of convenience food. And so we went to interview people and then go shopping with them and go cooking with them. And I went to see this one lady, and she was kind of mid-40s, lived in London, yoga instructor, super fit and healthy, said she'd never use ready-made food. And when I went to her house and we had dinner, it made sense. Like, she cooked us dinner, there were recipe books everywhere, there were ingredients everywhere. You know, it just looked like, yep, she's someone that cooks from scratch all the time. And about an hour later, I went shopping with her to Waitrose. We're going up and down the aisles, and we get to the ready meal aisle, and she kind of chucks in a ready-made mashed potato and chucks in a ready chopped red onion. I kind of said, well, how does that match up with what you were telling me? And she went, oh, well, you know, she looked at me like I was stupid, actually. She went, well, I'm a busy person. I haven't got time to peel and chop vegetables. And then we get to the end of the supermarket where all the good stuff is, you know, the confectionery and the alcohol. And again, I think, well, we're going to fly past here because she, you know, Delhi is a temple, you know, etc. But then she sweeps in a whole load of chocolate and a whole load of Prosecco and champagne. And I said, oh, well, how does that match up? And she said, oh, well, that's for girls' night on a Friday night. That doesn't count. And it was just, I thought it was such a brilliant insight, because she's not lying to me. You know, we all have our own version of who we believe we are, and that's the version we project out onto the world. And every now and then we have these moments where we take a break from who we are. And so her on a Friday night with her friends, that's her taking a break from who she is. So she's never going to tell you that in a survey. She probably won't tell you that in an interview, because that's just not who she is. You only get that insight by observing, by seeing people, by watching their behavior, by seeing how they react and act in different ways. You know, and that's why the answer isn't more surveys. That's why we're over the line on surveys, because what we really, really need to do is spend more time out and about with real people in their real lives and real situations. And that's where you observe the things that even they can't tell them what to do. Otherwise, to your point, you only ever end up getting a very, very thin slice of people's opinions on a particular subject and particular moments.
Interesting, thank you. So you did touch on it earlier in that conversation, but I was interested in a recent post of yours around that defensive decision making and the questions you asked on this subject. So can we get into this a little bit more? I think it's such an important issue, because and not really that spoken about, but critical when we do think of sort of great leadership.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. So there's a behavioral psychologist called Gerd Gigerenzer, a German psychologist, and he wrote a great book called Risk Savvy about 10 years ago now. I think 2014 it came out. And he talks about this principle of defensive decision making, which is where mostly leaders in organizations will make the decision that is least likely to get them in trouble, rather than taking more of a risk to make a decision that might help the company grow. Now that's a problem, because if you're a CEO and you have a leadership team, you don't want all of them to take the risk. Absolutely not. But you need some of them to take the risk, because of the some that take the risk, one will work, and that risk that gets taken may well account for 80% of your growth over the next few years. If no one takes the risk, you don't go anywhere. Now we're starting to see this, I think, more and more as kind of probably maybe fueled with social media, but other things as well. The kind of blame culture has really grown over the past 10 or 15 years. People are more kind of individually outraged and on the hook. So if something goes wrong, people are like, who's going to resign over this? And of course, in some industries, particularly in financial services and in banking, we're starting to see much more of executives quite literally now being kind of put in front of the courts and potentially being put into prison and jail. And by the way, this isn't me commenting on whether that's the right thing or not, but it is a thing. And so with this situation occurring, it makes it much more likely that individuals are going to avoid making what they perceive as a riskier decision or a bolder decision. It's much easier, rather than stick your head above the parapet, to stay in the pack. Just tick things over, do the surveys, and it's true on an individual level and a company level. Just keep things going. Don't risk anything that might backfire. And it means there's a real lack of growth, a real lack of innovation, a real lack of entrepreneurship. And it means in big companies particularly, they end up just kind of following each other. You know, you see this again. I think banking is an interesting industry for this, where they just kind of follow insurance as well. Just follow the crowd. Everyone just does the same thing, and it's all fine until a Monzo or a Starling appear, or until a Lemonade appear in the insurance industry. So a few startups that are saying, no, we are going to try and change. We are going to try and change this. And all of a sudden, the incumbents are left to struggle and carry up. So yeah, it's a really interesting area, I think, behavioural area that organisations, individuals, and teams really need to look at.
It's so interesting, as you say, and I think courage is one of the foundations for exceptional leadership, isn't it? That bravery, and I think that's really what sets people apart. And it's funny the point you make about, the Starlings, the Monzos, because I don't know sometimes whether the industry sort of thinks that they can shrug the disruptors off, because they get to a certain point. If we look at Revolut now, they disrupt, become this big huge success, and now they're embroiled in regulatory overview, and whether or not they'll come out of that again the same as everybody else. So they lose that disruption because all of a sudden they have to conform and be, and quite rightly, I'm not saying they shouldn't be held to account, but whether or not that really softened, and then everyone goes, oh, they're gone again, and we can carry on as we always did.
Yeah, it's a really interesting dynamic. I mean, I write about it a little bit in the book, actually, about this kind of flow that you see in startups where, a new startup comes in and says they want to break anything. I mean, Uber's a great example of this, breaks a whole load of rules. Everyone gets really annoyed. They eventually get drawn back in and have to start complying to the rules. But by that point, it's too late. They've already changed customers' expectations. So Uber is now a fully compliant kind of organization compared to where it was, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. But it's already changed the rules now. So the kind of on-demand vehicles are already there. Low costs, low prices are already there. Surge pricing is already there. It's already happened. Same with Revolut, Monzo, Starling. They've come in. Actually, the others have been okay, but Revolut's had a few issues. Actually, it seems to have sorted them out now, but it's already changed the rules. Now, what I think is interesting is where you separate organisation and individuals there. Because I suppose there's one argument to say that if you're, for example, an HSBC, and you're still making £5 or £6 billion profit every year, why would you try and upset the apple cart? And if you're a senior leader there and you think, well, I've only got 4 or 5 years left in my career, or I just need 4 or 5 years, and you're looking at Monzo, you kind of go, well, are they going to disrupt us within 5 years? Probably not. So a lot of the changes we're seeing with the likes of Monzo, Starling, etc., particularly about finance here, but are long-term changes. Because you're moving from a world where everyone had one bank account when they were younger and just stuck with that bank account, to a world where now people's phones are their bank accounts, and on that phone they might have a savings app with Zopa and a current account with Monzo and a mortgage related to HSBC, etc., etc., etc. And so the whole financial system is defragmented, and brands are starting to be disintermediated, because of course the biggest thing on your phone is Apple Pay or Google Pay. I never look at my credit card anymore. Doesn't matter who it's with. Doesn't matter who it's with. So, but this fragmented system, that's kind of 10, 20, 30 years before it completely disrupts, a lot of the organizations involved, because there's still a huge number of customers over 50 who, as stereotype slightly, but are likely to still stay with that main bank account on the whole. And that's where most of the wealth is. So there's that's where it takes courage, because that's where it takes a leader to say, look, I could sit here and do nothing and I'm still going to earn my bonus because we're still going to make a load of money, because that's how the system works. But I can see in 20 years' time, this will change. And I want us to be at the forefront. So I'm going to put my neck on the line and make sure we're prepared to do that, even if it means a bit more cost now or a bit more investment now to do that. That's where real courage comes in. And it doesn't exist too much. To more specifically answer your question, I think a lot of big organizations think, well, we'll just buy them. We'll get to a point and we'll just buy them. We'll just buy the technology from Revolut and from Monzo. And I think they're going to start to find that a lot of those companies don't want to sell, but actually they just want to kind of IP and just go and grow their own business and become a corporate rather than just joining the others. But it's fascinating to watch from the outside as well.
It is. Thank you. Yeah. So, I mean, you're also a board advisor, and we speak with lots of people interested in board advisory and NED portfolios. What do you think makes a good board advisor, John?
That's a great question, and I'm probably still learning myself, actually. I think the biggest thing. So I'm a board advisor for a charity called Young Enterprise that helps young adults. Lots of people will know of them because they would have done them at school, but they help young adults to develop entrepreneurial mindsets, entrepreneurial skills through programs at school where they have to start up and set up their own business. And I think the biggest challenge that I've certainly found since I've been on the board is being able to separate my duties from the kind of exec team. I'm naturally someone that wants to get stuck in and do things and make things happen. And so when you're having your board meetings and you can see the different possibilities, you kind of want to lean forward and go, well, let's do it. And, you have to remember that that's not really your role. I have to remember that's not really my role. So I think as a board advisor, I think it's almost the big strengths are kind of mentoring skills. I think you need to be able to have that mentor type relationship, which is very different from a coaching relationship. That mentor relationship of asking good questions, to the executive team, bringing your experience, bringing your perspective, but knowing when you have to draw a line and hand over and let them go and take your perspective and either use it or ignore it, and that's up to them. But it's a really I see it as a real like mentorship skills that make a great board advisor. I also think alongside that, it is, just to reiterate, is that perspective. I think that's what boards should really be there for, is to help bring that outside in perspective to the exec team, from people that, so I've never worked in the charity sector, so I can bring perspectives and experiences from many, many other companies that I have worked with and many other industries that I've worked with, and just to kind of show what's possible and what could make a big difference in their world. So yeah, I think that mentorship role and that ability to step away and not kind of be drawn into the day-to-day, but keep your head out, look at that longer term strategy, is what I think makes it a great board advisor. And also I think that's what makes it a really fun role, actually, being able to properly get your head up and look forward rather than just being in the weeds of the day-to-day business.
Excellent. Yeah, well, hopefully that will help quite a lot of people. And I know I've heard that so many times, that ability to not get, you have to really be hands off, don't you, ultimately? And I think again, like we were saying about the courage, I think some of the most successful companies are the ones who really lean into their board and allow the board access to the entire business and encourage the leaders to talk to the board and the board to the leaders. And then there's other organisations that are very much hands off and don't really engage them. So I think anybody who's looking to do that, you should check how the board is perceived as well. Have you seen those differences yourself?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think those differences. I mean, to be honest, you just get lots of differences across different types of boards as well. I mean, I'm talking about one in particular, but I'm also on the advisory board for a fintech startup called Echo, who are doing great things. And I do think that even when you look across different companies, the board member needs to be very different depending on what stage they're at and what they need at their time, actually. Yes. So, Echo, brand new, 2 or 3 years in now, but really growing. They need a lot of connections, they need a lot of network, they need a lot of kind of a bit more direct advice about how to do various things, because they're growing and learning as individuals and as a business. That's very different to a 60-year-old charity that actually needs an injection of new thinking and new thought to keep it strategic. So, those differences are lots of differences depending on like the people that you are, depending on the mix of roles you've got on the board and what your role is on that board. For Young Enterprise, I'm one of the people that is from a more kind of propositional innovation background. Many of the other board members are from a more financial background. So you need to have your role, the thing you're really delivering in. But then, depending on which company you're with, they're going to need different things at different times. And again, that's why I think people that have those kind of NED portfolios, actually, they can be really interesting because you can really flex what you're doing many times a day.
Great. Okay. And you've talked about Young Enterprise a little bit. So if we can pick that one, because I think I've been looking at that one myself in terms of if I've got some time to give back. I think it's really important, and I'm very passionate about the elevation and development of future talent and, especially our younger people, and the access that they get to, mentors and role models that they can really reach heights that perhaps they don't believe or know that are available to them. So do you want to sort of talk a little bit about that organisation?
Yeah, thank you. It's such an important organisation, I think. So Young Enterprise, works with schools and some universities, runs programs to help young adults really applied learning is how we describe it. So there's the most famous program they do is the company program. Lots of people would have done that at school, probably in sixth form, where you're given a little bit of money, you're given a year, and there's a group of you, and you get to start up your own company. And that's the program. That's it. You got business mentors, and you get to run this program. You have a CEO and a managing director and a head of marketing, and it's just amazing to see how the young adults respond in that way. There was a school, Denby High in Luton, that decided to run a kind of pilot with a group of their students, just to see what impact it would have on other elements of their education. And for all of them, their levels of attendance went up, their levels of attainment went up, just from being part of this much more vocational, practical way of learning that's outside of the core curriculum. And one of the big things the enterprise is trying to do is to get this put into the core curriculum, because it's such an important part. Now, what underpins the charity is this drive for social mobility, as you kind of mentioned. So my background, I grew up in a place called Clapton in Essex, which used to be famous for having a lovely pier and a couple of the characters of EastEnders going to visit it every summer. And now it's more famous for Brexit and Nigel Farage, I think. But not a rich area. I didn't know anyone that worked in London. In fact, pretty much everyone I knew was a builder or worked at the local building society or in the shops, and that's fine. But I had no idea of this world. I had no network around me, and it probably, I run a consultancy now, the foundation. I probably wasn't until I was maybe 27 or 28 I even knew companies like this existed. That I even knew you could have a job in consulting, customer experience, marketing, innovation. It's just never something that had been part of my mindset. And I think this is what we see so much with the young enterprise, is how many young adults are restricted just by that lack of knowledge, a lack of network, a lack of opportunity. They're no less skilled than any people that end up making it into these kind of roles or running businesses. They just don't know it's a possibility. They just don't know they can. And you have to be surrounded by those role models. And it's so true in all kinds of life. It could be true for for kind of deprived parts of the area. It might be true for different lifestyles. It might be true for just kind of who you are as a person. You want to see people like you doing amazing things, and that gives you the motivation and the awareness to go and do it. So that's a really big part of the enterprise, really, is giving people the opportunity to develop and learn these skills and to know that this is an option for them. And there's some incredible stories come out from the charity every single week that talk about, the way that people have gone on to run businesses and have really incredible careers. So yeah, it's a fantastic charity. It works with all kinds of organisations, and if anyone can get in touch with me if they want to hear more about it as well, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you for sharing. Is there anything else that you would like to talk about then before we close?
No, I think it's really interesting, actually. Some of the different questions that you asked, they all kind of come back to the same thing in a way, which I think is understanding people. I think whether it's about how you kind of find your human experiences, whether it's about how you understand your customers through the surveys you use, even when you're talking about young enterprise, it's about what matters to young people. All of this is about taking the time to really understand people. And when I started HSBC, I went on a management course called Foundation People Management.
Mm-hmm.
And it said, look, there's 3 rules of good people management, and it's know your people, know your people, know your people. And that stayed with me kind of 20 years later. And I think it's true across so many things. We're all so busy now. It's so easy to just kind of get onto the treadmill and just be churning out emails and doing work and doing PowerPoint presentations and everything else, and not stopping and just taking the time to invest in really understanding whoever your audience is, whether it's customers or whether it's colleagues or whether it's employees or whoever it is that you're working for, whoever you're serving and working with. That time, it's always seen as a time cost, and that time taken to really go and understand what matters to those people can end up giving you much, much better ideas in a much shorter time frame than it would otherwise if you were just staring or chatting to ChatGPT all the time as well. Not that I'm anti-AI, I think it's fantastic to kind of bring together, but I think that would be the big thing for me, is how do we keep making the time to understand the people that we're here to serve.
And I think the point that you make is so important, and I think hopefully the more that we are immersed in this, as you say, AI, digital world, talking to ChatGPT or whatever we're doing, hopefully we can get that time. It's supposed to be going to be making us more efficient, but will we use that time to form better human connections? Because I think that's where the wealth and the knowledge is, and that's where we can all benefit, really. So I very much hope that's where we get to spend it rather than sort of virtually.
Yeah, exactly right. More conversations in person. I think more whiskies and wines.
Yeah, absolutely.
And much
maybe
less
not as
chat.
much red wine for the teeth. Great. All right. Well, super lovely to chat with you, John. And obviously, we'll have all your details in the links so that they can connect with you and look at the business and your book and everything. So it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you.